Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy and healthy start to this nice and relaxed Saturday morning over here from Helsinki, Finland. Plenty to talk about today as we're going to go through a bit of a statistical analysis of what to kind of expect next for Bitcoin over this next maybe 7 to 14 day period. And with that in mind, I also want to reiterate my thoughts that while Bitcoin has had a phenomenal bounce, and I suspect that this bounce probably does go upwards and onwards over some short amount of period of time, I am not of the opinion that I would theoretically call the macro low in just yet. In fact, I do think that Bitcoin, for all the people who are saying this is the last time below 30,000 bucks, I think that that is perhaps misguided for right now. At least that's not what the data suggests. So we're going to go into the macro video tomorrow, perhaps in detail. But for right now, I just want to make sure that I'm not inciting the FOMO fears. Anyways, with that said, I want to humbly request that if you do find this content valuable, or if you just want to give back in a nice and free way, the like button is the easiest way to do that. And it's also free. And if you want to dislike the video, you can always do that after the video as well if you just, if you decide that you hate it. Other than that, I want to get into it right now, wasting no more time. And let's start off right here, actually. This chart is not going away, baby. And this is going to be a little bit more of an insight into how I kind of do my own statistical analyses and kind of the data that I'm mining for my own strategies. Anyways, in this case, this is the 5-day chart yet again. Don't worry, we're not going to go over the exact same things that we have been before, but I just want to point out that yes, this has played out. We've seen essentially what you would expect on this move, as much as you can expect from something like this based on the statistics from it, which was essentially low BBWP over here in the teens. The expansion phase from that on average has led to about a 45% move to the upside or the downside done over the course of, around about 40 days. What have we seen thus far in comparison to the last 4 or 5 iterations? Well, we saw a 47% move to the downside. Okay, that's very much in alignment with what we have seen historically speaking done over the course of 40 days actually, so not bad right there. I still will be looking at the 5-day stochastic momentum to kind of judge if and when major pressure to the downside does subside, and that number will very likely change massively on the next closing period. For right now, it is 36,530. Assuming that Bitcoin doesn't close above there on this next closure, which is coming in tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern time, I would say that there is still range at best on the higher term timeframes, but range at best on the higher term timeframes could still likely produce some nice upside over the next coming weeks. So with that in mind, what I want to do now is actually we're going to get a little bit more in depth here, but basically what I want to do is I want to now measure the likely bounce or pullback, just essentially that mean reversion play after this volatility explosion that typically happens after that target is met. So in this case, we'll start back on over here. This was from the May dump of just last year, so basically exactly 1 year ago. And what I'm talking about is after that first initial move played out based off this signal with the BBWP on the 5-day, and then of course the 5-day stochastic momentum, after the target was met right here on the ultimate low from that move, essentially, obviously not like the ultimate low for forever, but the bounce after that, about 29.23% of interest right there. So I've actually already recorded all these down, but what I want to go through is, how I, basically taking an average of all these. So in this case, then we get another upside move over here a little bit later, a few months later, actually. And the mean reversion play after that was a move to the downside of about, 26.78% in this case. Same thing again, a few months later on the ultimate high from November. And what do we see from that to essentially the next signal building up right here, about 24 and change percent move. So that was kind of the play right there. And then the more recent one, we did see this major move. This one actually a little bit more on the on the higher side here, of course, coming off the lows to the next major high was about 45% or so. So I've already gone ahead and done the math on this, and the average mean reversion play on this has been essentially 31.1%. Now, of course, this does include both the upside and the downside moves from this. If we were to just look at the downside moves and the average from that, it would be about 38.12%. So what we can do now is we can come in from those lows and measure up where those areas would be essentially around and see if that lines up with anything else from a more technical perspective. So in this case, right here, we can take the low. Obviously, we already have the low for this one, and moving upwards and onwards, we do see about a 31.1% moves puts Bitcoin basically at about 34,000 bucks. And now I'm not doing this exactly, perfectly right there, but an average right there. Now, again, if we only measure the downside moves, which did have, bigger bounces respectively to the mean reversion plays from the upside moves, well, that would be about 38%. So I want to mark off first the 34 region so we don't forget that. We'll just do that right Come on, it's hard to do. There we go, nice one. And then 38% puts Bitcoin basically like 35,000 bucks, which is very interesting. Which is very, very interesting, in fact, because that is going to line up with a couple of the major areas that we've been looking at from a Fibonacci perspective on a likely bounce, over these next couple of weeks if Bitcoin does indeed initiate it. And where would that essentially be? Well, as we denoted over here, that would be basically around the 0.5 Fibonacci retracement, which is also in alignment with the last major gap that we do see from CME right here. Obviously from last week, not this past week, but the week before that, the Friday closure to this past Monday open, we do see a nice little gapola right there, right around the 0.5 Fib, essentially 35,000 bucks, give or take, 500 bucks from that number, all kind of within that same pocket. So ultimately, if Bitcoin does pop back around there, I would be looking for pullbacks at minimum. Based off this Fib, gap fill, and of course statistical analysis alongside that. And there's very likely, an area of interest along the way as well, the 382. But besides that, I should go over why I think Bitcoin's also a little bit more likely to bounce here, not just because we have met that target based off of that analysis, but also just, some other macro things as well, some pretty significant things. Bitcoin came all the way down to the 55 basically on the monthly. That's going to very, 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 very likely be a poppy area, and also hit the macro Fib here, the 618 from the ultimate high of this cycle to the ultimate low of the prior cycle. Again, bots and algos are just typically, going to be designed to be closing typically their short positions right around there, or, buying for a bit of a bounce. Although I imagine the short side a little bit more pleasurable right now, obviously. And if we take this one step further, I do want to say that I'm generally looking for Bitcoin to bounce out of this range. Now, we have not addressed, by the way, the lower term timeframes just yet. We'll get to that soon enough. But I'd be looking for Bitcoin to bounce out of this range, and probably over the next couple weeks, with upside likely perhaps around those targets, statistically speaking. As long as this condition holds true over here. And this is the daily stochastic momentum. This was essentially what we've been looking at on this channel for the past, the past week now, suggesting that, hey, as long as this is down, risk is still to the downside, obviously. But if this pops up, corrective move, very, very likely incoming. And what do we have right here? We see that daily stochastic momentum is going to be upside postured as long as Bitcoin's basically above its current low, which is 25,600 or so. That's the pivot. Obviously, that's going to change with each and every passing day. But for right now, that in alignment with what we see over here on extreme volatility conditions, with the daily BBWP actually maxing out at 100 percentile for multiple days in a row. I just want to see this get below the moving average. And then, yes, I am looking for corrective move. Again, corrective move within the context of our current trend would imply likely a lower high and another try to the downside over time. Doesn't mean it's going to end up completely being that way, but ultimately, I'm not going to be calling a macro low here just yet. We're going to go over the reasons why in tomorrow's video, because I want to keep this video a little bit more on the shorter side. But in this case, a few other things of interest right here, as we do see the open interest, to use a bad pun, I guess, or alliteration or whatever the fuck, has come all the way down to levels that we haven't really seen since September of last year. So we are seeing it's the great reset, right? Everyone with their fucking tinfoil hats talks about the great reset, although there is actually, they literally do call it that, which is kind of crazy. It's like, who the fuck's doing their PR for real? Anyways, in this case right here, we're seeing the great reset with a leverage. People are getting washed out of this market, as you would expect. And also just kind of as an observation, maybe you've kind of seen the same thing as well, maybe not. Let me know in the comment section below. But what I've noticed is I follow a few Twitter accounts that just, they literally can find a bullish narrative for anything. It's insane. It's literally insane. It's just as bad as the perma bears as well, right? But these people I've been looking at to kind of judge the sentiment, and I finally started to find them post some more bearish charts rather than just straight up, it's just fucking ridiculous, right? Anyways, in that case, I just thought that was kind of interesting from an underlying, market sentiment perspective. Obviously, we're at a 10 on the fear and greed, which is, basically, some of the lowest that you typically do see it. Not necessarily a buy signal in and of itself, but the other thing that I wanted to get onto now is a shorter term time frame. So we've only been addressing the daily and above up until this point. We have not addressed the short term time frames, and Bitcoin has a big range, as we did say yesterday, on the short term time frames, even seen as this is a very volatile move, so naturally the ranges will be bigger. And in this case, I do look at Bitcoin as likely to make that next leg up towards, probably towards those targets, short term, more around about 32,000 bucks, as that was a 382, which I don't think I mentioned earlier, which, very likely is a short term resistance at minimum. But as long as Bitcoin's above the 618 right here on this current consolidation, which is just below 28,000 bucks, as long as Bitcoin's above there, especially on a full hour, maybe even an hourly closure as well, I look at Bitcoin as a lot more likely to put in a base here, whether it comes down, a little bit lower to 28 28.5 like this, or even lower to 28,000 even like this, and then pops back up and does something like that, I don't have a strong opinion on, especially seeing that it is a weekend. But ultimately, as long as Bitcoin remains above 28,000 bucks, that's kind of my line in the sand for the BULAs right here. Bitcoin loses 28,000, very likely going to retest around the lows, probably make a slightly lower low, and I'll be wrong about Bitcoin rallying first before playing out more downside. But in this case, it's still a game of range resolutions on the shorter term timeframes, right? The short term time frame range high is obviously going to be right around here, so I would be cognizant of this on like an hourly at about just below 31,000 bucks. Doesn't really mean too much, but above there, I would be looking for this next region to be tested, which is again in alignment with about the 382, I believe. Let me just double check. Yep, right there at about 32.4 to 32.5. Any sort of a 4-hour closure, maybe even an hourly closure above about 32.5, I'd say. And I'd be looking for that next leg up around that sort of average play that we have seen in the past, fulfill the CME gap, very likely pull back from there. And then if Bitcoin were to, grind it out and then roll on over, that would be a good time to be looking for perhaps around the lows be retested yet again. And again, that's around about 35,000 bucks. I am still macro bearish on Bitcoin as long as Bitcoin is, obviously below like $40,000, let alone fucking $45,000. So we won't even discuss that topic for right now. But ultimately, I do hope that this was in some way helpful. I think I'll be signing off now. This was a nice and short one. Should remind you, however, that on Instagram, there's a bunch of scammers there. I only have one account. The link is in the description below. Any other account is not me. I don't have any secret trading funds. And then also Bybit. Yep, we do have a Bybit shill link in the description below as well. It's a great place to go get wrecked on. They got good liquidity if if you need. And more importantly, in a sincere tone, as always, make sure that you test your strategies out before actually putting anything to work, whether it be lever trading or spot trading. Doesn't really matter in my opinion. There's no reason to put money at risk unless you've actually back test your strategies, which you can do for free. You can do it even on the Krown trading application for free. It's all there set up for you. You can do it pen and paper for free. You can do it on Excel or Microsoft Sheets Google Sheets, whatever the hell, for free as well. You can do that, get your repetitions in, see if it's actually going to work out or not, and then perhaps consider putting it to work. Anyways, other than that, I'm going to be signing off now. Take care and see you soon.